Imagine walking into a car dealership and driving out in a brand new fully electric vehicle for about $10,000. No incentives, no fine print, just the sticker price. It sounds like a scam, or maybe a golf cart with delusions of grandeur. But in China, that car is real. It's called the BYD Seagull, and it's already on the road by the hundreds of thousands. Which raises an obvious question. If this car exists, why can't Americans buy it? The Seagull isn't some stripped-down toy. It's a genuine city car with air conditioning, a touchscreen, airbags, and a real electric drivetrain, starting at roughly 69,800 yuan, or around $9,700, depending on the exchange rate. For comparison, the average new car in the United States now costs north of $48,000. Even a used car averages close to $27,000. So a brand new EV for the price of a decent used sedan isn't just cheap. It's a price point that, on paper, shouldn't be possible under normal manufacturing economics. And that's exactly why it's worth asking how BYD pulled it off. The easy explanation people reach for is cheap labor. It's a comforting story because it doesn't require rethinking anything about how the rest of the world builds cars. But labor costs alone don't explain a gap this large. Chinese factory wages have risen for years, and BYD builds cars with heavy automation, not rows of workers hand-assembling parts. The real answer is layered, and it starts with the battery. BYD's Blade battery is arguably the single biggest reason the Seagull can hit this price. Instead of using the cylindrical or pouch-style cells found in most EVs, BYD engineered a long, flat lithium iron phosphate cell that gets stacked directly into the battery pack like a blade sliding into a case. That design skips a lot of the extra structural hardware and cooling complexity that traditional battery packs need. Lithium iron phosphate chemistry is also cheaper than the nickel-cobalt-manganese blends used in many Western EVs, and it's more thermally stable, which is part of why BYD has leaned so heavily on crash and nail penetration tests to show these packs don't catch fire easily. Since the battery is typically the single most expensive part of an EV, often a third or more of the total cost, shaving that number down changes everything downstream. But the battery is only one piece. BYD didn't start as just a car maker. It started as a battery manufacturer in the 1990s, and that history shows up in how the whole company is built today. BYD makes its own batteries, its own electric motors, its own power electronics, and even its own semiconductor chips. Most automakers, including Tesla, still lean on outside suppliers for a lot of these components. BYD builds nearly all of it in-house. That vertical integration means fewer middlemen taking a margin, tighter control over quality, and something that mattered enormously during the pandemic. When global chip shortages crippled other automakers, BYD kept producing because it wasn't waiting on someone else's factory. Then there's the environment BYD is operating in, which is honestly hard to replicate anywhere else on Earth. China has spent over 2 decades building out an EV supply chain that touches nearly everything, from lithium refining to battery-grade chemicals to the factories that stamp out car bodies. Entire industrial clusters exist where a battery plant, a parts supplier, and an assembly line sit within a short drive of each other. That proximity cuts shipping costs and lead times dramatically. Add in a domestic market where over 9 million EVs were sold in a single recent year, and you get manufacturing scale that spreads fixed costs across an enormous number of vehicles. None of this happened by accident. Chinese industrial policy has subsidized EV development for years through tax breaks, purchase incentives, and direct government investment. That's a factual, documented part of the story, not a political judgment about whether it was the right approach. So if the car is real, safe, and this cheap, why isn't it sitting in an American showroom? The short answer is tariffs. In 2024, the United States raised tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles to 100%, effectively pricing them out of the market before they could even compete on cost. That's on top of existing trade restrictions and a broader push, spanning both political parties, to reduce American dependence on Chinese manufacturing for anything considered strategically important. National security is part of this conversation too. And it's not just background noise. Modern EVs are rolling computers, collecting location data, camera footage, and driving patterns, all of it processed through onboard software. American officials have raised real concerns about Chinese-made vehicles transmitting that data back to servers in China, or even being remotely disabled in some worst-case geopolitical scenario. The Commerce Department has moved to restrict Chinese software and hardware in connected vehicles sold in the U.S., citing these exact risks. Whether that threat is immediate or mostly precautionary is genuinely debated among policy experts, but the concern itself is documented and taken seriously in Washington. Then there's the industry itself. American automakers employ close to 1 million people directly, with millions more in related supply chains. Letting a $10,000 EV compete freely would put enormous pressure on that entire ecosystem. And it's not hard to see why lawmakers from auto-heavy states have pushed hard for protection. Critics of the tariffs argue this shields inefficiency and keeps prices artificially high for consumers. Supporters argue that without some protection, American EV manufacturing could be wiped out before it has a real chance to mature, the same way it happened to large parts of the U.S. solar panel industry a decade ago. Zoom out further, and this stops being a story about one small car. It becomes a proxy for the larger competition between the U.S. and China over who controls the technologies that will define the next few decades. Battery chemistry, critical mineral processing, semiconductors, and artificial intelligence. Electric vehicles sit right at the intersection of all of them. So what happens in the hypothetical world where the Seagull is suddenly allowed to compete freely in America? Some analysts think it would force Tesla, Ford, and GM to accelerate their own low-cost EV programs or risk losing the entry-level market entirely. Others think the effect would ripple into the used car market, since a $10,000 new EV would undercut a huge slice of that segment. And some argue American manufacturers simply couldn't respond fast enough, leading to real job losses in a short window. There's no consensus here, only competing bets on how markets and companies would actually react. Which brings us back to the original question, and it turns out it was never really about a car. It's about whether affordability or a strategic control should come first when a technology this important is on the line. Two systems, one built on centralized industrial policy and massive scale, the other on protecting domestic industry and long-term security, are racing toward the same finish line from very different directions. So here's the question we're sitting with. If a safe, fully electric car costs around $10,000 somewhere else in the world, should Americans have the right to choose whether to buy it, or is keeping it out of the country a necessary price for protecting America's future? That's not a question with a clean answer. It's one worth arguing about in the comments.